You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. In today's episode, John is joined by Mark Jensenius. Mark Jensenius is DART's SMART Nav engineer. He designed and implemented the SMART Nav Guidance algorithm that was used in the thermal phase of the DART mission. He is a guidance, navigation and controls engineer at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, which built the DART spacecraft and is managing the mission for NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office. Remember to subscribe to Event Horizon so you never miss an episode.
Mark Jensenius, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, Mark, we have seen probably one of the most amazing feats of actually hitting an object in space with another object that we've seen in a long time, with amazing pictures of that thing just bearing down and hitting dead center. How long did you work on figuring out exactly how to make that work?
So, team here at APL, at the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins, has been working on this for over a decade. It started as a concept where there was this double asteroid system, and we knew that if we could perturb the smaller one, then we could start taking all these cool measurements about how effective we were. And it turned into, well, can we do that? And so what started 10 years ago as a feasibility study gradually morphed into an independent research project and then into a funded NASA effort.
In planning this, all right, so where do you start? I mean, when you say, I want to hit a moving object in space with a spacecraft, an impactor, where do you start in actually calculating how to do that? What does the beginning of the process look like?
So what happened with the team over here, there was a great set of folks working together in our space sector, and they started by walking literally across the street to our air and missile defense sector to talk with a group of folks that were already familiar with hitting things at high speed, just not necessarily out in space. And so I actually come from that background and was able to leverage some of the experience and knowledge that I had gained looking at those projects. And one of the basic things is you can look at the fact that you've got these objects approaching at high speed, but if you look at them in a relative frame, you can almost draw a triangle between, let's say I hold the asteroid fixed, and I've got my spacecraft, I'm moving at a velocity, so I will continue to move forward and miss the asteroid on my current trajectory, but I can draw a triangle between the closest point that I come to the asteroid, and where I am now. And then you basically can work through the geometry of that triangle and figure out, okay, I can take measurements. Those measurements come in the form of angles, and I can relate those angles back to what this triangle is, because ultimately I don't know where I'm headed, but I can start to infer based on the triangles that I'm measuring and how they change with time where I'm going, and then I can make course corrections.
About this particular mission, DART, so there was a point where you no longer could make any course corrections and it had to bring itself in, so to speak. How do you make a spacecraft autonomously decide to do the last moments of the missions on its own?
Right. So the last 4 hours were entirely autonomous. And as you kind of alluded to there, the last 2.5 minutes, we couldn't maneuver at all. And that was actually driven by a science requirement where they needed to have these pristine pictures that we all saw at the end. But the spacecraft itself has long solar arrays. And those solar arrays, it's almost imperceivable, but they do flap a little bit as you're firing the thrusters, and that shakes our camera. And we have such a narrow field of view that can cause blurring in the images. So we were required to stop 2.5 minutes out to ensure that those final pictures would be as pristine as they were. And so when you're 4 hours out, everything's a little dot. When you're 2.5 minutes out, you don't have much time to maneuver anymore anyway. So you already have to have yourself lined up. So it really was just, when you solve all that math and you work through all the simulations, you come up with hey, spacecraft, you have to be at your best estimate of where you need to be 2.5 minutes out or earlier, right? You try and get there. So we actually had a separate mode that the spacecraft entered about 8 minutes prior to impact, where, no kidding, it tried to make sure it was lined up for as precise a hit as it could achieve.
Now tell us about APL, Johns Hopkins, and what you guys do. Give us an overview of what exactly are you doing in space exploration? Is this your job to basically apply physics and figure out how to hit an asteroid with an impact?
So that's one of the things that we do. The Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins is actually quite a large campus. We've got over 8,000 employees working on a whole variety of tough problems, stretching from military to the healthcare sector to space. And it's really a spot where we try and bring all the best minds together. And then we reach out to each other and, hey, my space project might involve hitting things at high speed. I can go talk to somebody in air and missile defense and leverage their knowledge. Or they might be interested in doing something in space and they can go talk to the space folks and leverage their knowledge. So we try to have, while we all have our own swim lanes, we're also okay reaching across the street to talk to each other to solve some of these problems. And as for space, APL did the New Horizons mission, Parker Solar Probe. They've got a long history of working on spacecraft. And the next big thing is the Dragonfly mission to Titan that they're working on.
The Dragonfly mission, that's actually a copter of sorts, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing, especially with the liquid hydrocarbons on Titan. Just imagine ocean vistas of something that isn't really an ocean. Now, have we seen any indication yet that the asteroid moved?
I mean, I think we know the asteroid moved. The question is it enough to perceive? And so I know that we're still waiting for data to come back. The science team is still analyzing it. Some of the initial imagery that's come back from Hubble and James Webb Space Telescope indicate that you can see it, there's a large cloud of debris that's reflecting a lot of light. And so while it's fantastic from the standpoint of, yes, we definitely hit an asteroid, it complicates things when it comes to taking measurements of those sensitive light curves and determining the exact change in the orbit. So that work is still ongoing and is expected to keep going for a couple more weeks before they can arrive at an answer that will let us know, did we perturb it by the amount that we expected to?
It looked like from the James Webb images, et cetera, ground-based images, that this debris cloud was huge. We really messed this asteroid's day up. Now, my question for you is, was that surprising? Did it actually exceed what you thought it might do?
So I've talked with the science team here at APL, and it was within expectations. It was on the higher end of expectations, but it was within expectations. And when you design a test like this, where you don't know precisely what the outcome is, where there are multiple competing models for what this asteroid might be, you design the test for the scenario where you don't get the design, it's not favorable because you still want to perceive the change in period in the asteroid system. And so if everything lines up exactly the opposite way, you get a really large effect. And that's what we're seeing. We've got all this debris scattered around, but it could have been where this asteroid had a different composition and we didn't get that.
Now, there's also the question of density, and you're hitting an object that you don't really know how dense it is, and that can change the physics. And it looks like, at least I can tell, that this actually worked very well. In other words, we can divert an asteroid. Can we say that yet? In other words, can we say if we have to? We can divert an asteroid. The question is by how much, right? Momentum transfer definitely happened. We saw that happen when we hit the asteroid. And momentum transfer has been demonstrated on deep impact as well. It was just, deep impact wasn't designed to make a measurable difference, whereas this is designed to make a measurable difference. So we can't say yet that we've made a measurable difference, but obviously we know we have changed the course of the asteroid. We just don't know if it's enough to measure. Will it speed the asteroid up or slow it down? What's its orbit going to look like? So it's quite interesting. So we're slowing it down, which will speed up basically make the period a little bit faster. So we're slowing it down, which is going to cause the orbit to actually duck in a little bit closer to Didymos. And that actually is going to cause the overall period to drop. The goal was to drop the period by 73 seconds. What we were aiming for, kind of in the nominal sense, was maybe something around 10 minutes. So we'll have to see what it ultimately ends up being. Now, what's next for the software that you wrote for DART? I mean, can we use this for other future missions? So certainly we developed the software to not be specific to the DART mission itself. It has the capability of being given a flyby distance and then flying offset from an asteroid or another small body.
So it would be really nice to see it used on a project where instead of destroying the spacecraft, you used it to fly by asteroids and other interesting bodies out of the solar system at ranges that are much closer than what are typically possible.
Not so closer. So you could get, I mean, how close could you get to an asteroid using the software? I mean, can you get, one of the problems with looking at asteroids, and we saw this with Bennu, is resolution. So you could get very extremely high resolution images from the surface of an asteroid much more easily than we could before, right?
That's true. And a lot of what's in the software isn't specific to, say, the DART spacecraft. So how close you can get, how confident you can be in the numbers that are estimated on board is all a function of the sensors that you bring along. So if you put better sensors on a spacecraft than what DART had, you could conceivably get quite close. On the other hand, as you're getting closer and you're flying by, you're going to get a buildup of angular rates. So a lot of thought has to go into designing the spacecraft around such a mission, but you could get quite close. You might not have a lot of time at that close distance as you go flying by, but you could get quite close.
What did the speeds look like when the impactor hit? How fast was it going?
It was going almost 14,000 miles an hour, so just over 6 kilometers a second.
What did the spacecraft itself, as an impactor designed to impact an asteroid, what did that thing look like? I mean, did you load that thing up with heavy materials like lead or something like that? Or did it just rely entirely on kinematics?
We just relied entirely on kinematics. The spacecraft was a cube, and it was laid out in a way that just made sense to make it easy to put together and make sure that all of our instruments were pointed in the right directions. Our solar panels were able to get sun while we were in that terminal configuration, and our antennas could point back to Earth.
Now, this might not be your wheelhouse. We were originally going to have a member of the science team with us today, but he's sick. So I'm going to ask you this, and maybe you can answer. Analyzing the material blown off the asteroid, in other words, that big plume of material, can we learn what the composition of that object actually is?
So that's definitely not my wheelhouse, but I know that the science team is looking at it to figure out what they can determine. So I don't know what they can determine at the moment, but I know that there is some interest in looking at that data, and the community is very active about looking at the plume data right now.
This one is totally on me and just an observation for the audience. I'm wondering if you run something into an asteroid like that at that speed, you're going to generate heat. So objects like this tend to have volatiles beneath the surface, and I'm wondering if there'll be extra movement seen based on outgassing. And that's just my crazy question. You probably can't answer it, but it's one thing that I'm looking at. Now, with the movement of the asteroid, if we were to detect an object in the outer solar system coming in, say, around the orbit of Jupiter, do we now have a game plan? I mean, can we come up with a way to deflect it enough, even just a little, at that distance especially, and actually save Earth from an asteroid impact and an extinction event?
So I think it depends kind of question. If you see it inbound and it's going to hit on this orbit, I don't know that there would be enough time. But if it's something out at, say, around Jupiter and it's going around the sun multiple times before it comes, would have a close call with Earth, I think there's absolutely, this technology could be used. And NASA's investigating other technologies as well. But in all of the cases, time is your best weapon. So by developing the technology, spending the last 10 years developing that technology, we shaved 10 years off of our required reaction time when something's spotted. And
given that we haven't been hit by a major asteroid in 66 million years, we probably have the time.
Yes, well, and I mean, the other concern, right, is not just elimination of the entire planet's worth of species, but there are asteroids that can cause a really bad day for regional areas. The asteroid that showed up over Chelyabinsk was much smaller than what we were targeting in Dimorphos. So even small asteroids can have quite a large impact, even if it's not world-ending. And so it's that kind of thing that if we could see those out earlier, and obviously, the bigger they are, the easier you're able to see them, the less frequently they'll approach the Earth. But that's kind of the sweet spot, is the Dimorphos size, where we could really do something about it. And we're getting the technology out there to try and find them.
Now, about Chelyabinsk, now this caused millions of dollars in damage across central Russia. breaking windows and causing casualties and all kinds of horrible things. But these things hit a lot. Objects that size, mostly over the ocean, of course, but objects that size are not rare. Do we have any hope of eventually being able to detect that sort of thing and deflect it, or is it just too close? It's too close and it's too late. Or do we have hope of eventually being able to control objects on that level?
There's a whole spectrum of asteroids, from ones that hit the Earth every day and are nothing to worry about to bigger ones that'll cause problems. I can't speak to the size that NASA plans to be able to have observable in the future, but if you can observe it far enough in advance, you could divert it. The question would be, obviously, can we afford to shoot something every single day to divert something?
Is it possible, and this is a weird question, but I'll ask it anyway, is it possible that we could get enough of a handle on the physics, which on its face is just Newtonian? Could we divert an asteroid or a Chelyabinsk-sized object, of course, to the point where we can make it land in an ocean as opposed to overpopulated land? I mean, could we ever achieve that level of accuracy?
So again, it's starting to steer a little bit outside my area of expertise. The one thing I'll say is that there's a lot of uncertainties with these asteroids, even when we do find them. So I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to resolve, even if an asteroid was crossing our path, where precisely on Earth it would hit. And so I don't think anybody at this point in the game would be willing to step up and say, hey, we know where it's going to hit and we're going to move it 1,000 miles to the west, because you don't even know where it's going to hit in the first place.
Are there any plans for a further mission? In other words, do we have anything in the pipeline to look at diverting an asteroid even more precisely than what we just did with DART?
So NASA has talked about funding follow-on efforts to do other techniques beyond kinetic impactors. I don't know what they have or haven't funded at this point, but I do know that it is their plan to investigate other technologies as well.
Now, in that, since you guys at APL are the experts in this, do you foresee that it's going to be another project in your guys' wheelhouse?
I don't know.
Now, my last question for you is, all right, so when you're trying to bear in on an object like this, you lose control at a certain point because of, as you said, science constraints. But how do you maneuver it when it's further out? What does that look like? Are you using, I don't know, hydrazine thrusters or something like that to actually aim this thing? I mean, what's that process look like before you?
Yes, so it was hydrazine thrusters. We had 8 thrusters on board. We used them for both the maneuvers and attitude control. The name of the game, I kind of spoke earlier about, hey, at 8 minutes, we really try to hit this thing. Between 4 hours out and 8 minutes out, what we're trying to do is not preclude hitting this thing. So we don't maneuver until we need to maneuver. And so the idea is that in the case that we had last Monday, we were set up on a really good course by JPL. And so for the first 3 hours, we didn't maneuver. The spacecraft identified that it was on course and chose not to maneuver until Dimorphos was identified. And then it began a series of maneuvers that took it all the way in. But that was with hydrazine thrusters.
Looking at the images, it looked like this thing came in, hit a very large boulder, sort of square on hit this boulder. Do you guys think you destroyed that boulder?
I think anything in the final image probably had a really bad day.
Indeed. We often think about asteroids in terms of ourselves, near-Earth asteroids and everything like that. And in this case, it was the opposite. That asteroid had a very bad day. Hopefully there weren't any dinosaurs on it. Mark, thanks for joining us today. And I look forward to more missions like this, because planetary protection is something that we're going to have to do.
Yes, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Event Horizon and my channel are now available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube memberships. Early ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and sleep-focused content. Sign up now by clicking the links below to your platform of choice.